Hi everyone, I'm Professor Martin Lockstrom, the host of Management Science YouTube channel. In this video, we will continue exploring the strategy topic further. Strategy is a fundamental concept of management, but what does it really mean? Surprisingly, strategy is not particularly easy to define. Linguistically, the word derives from the Greek word strategos, meaning generalship or leading an army. And although there is no direct historical link between Greek military practice and modern ideas of strategy, the military metaphor is still powerful. Both military and business strategy can be described in similar ways and include some of the following. First, setting broad objectives that direct an enterprise toward its overall goal. Second, planning the path in general rather than specific terms that will achieve those goals. Third, stressing long-term rather than short-term objectives. Fourth, dealing with a total picture rather than stressing individual activities. And fifth, being detached from and above the confusion and distraction of day-to-day activities. Overall, there's no single absolute definition, but here follows a few definitions from scholars and management gurus. Alfred Chandler, professor of business history at Harvard Business School and Johns Hopkins University, defined it as the determination and the long-run goals and objectives of an enterprise and the adoption of the course of action and the allocation of resources necessary for carrying out these goals. Jay Barney, professor of strategic management at University of Utah, defined it as a firm's theory about how to compete successfully. Von Neumann and Morgenstern define it as a plan which specifies which choices the player will make in every possible situation. Another topic which comes to mind when talking about strategy is of course tactics, which is often used interchangeably with the word strategy. However, although the two terms are closely related, they are distinctly different. The best way of intuitively understanding the two is by using their original context, namely warfare, as analogies. In this sense, strategy can be said to be the more long-term planning done before one enters the battlefield. For instance, planning on which new territory to conquer and how to achieve this. Tactics then, on the other hand, concern the more short-term planning one does while already being in the battlefield. In other words, when the war has already started. Such type of planning could hence entail things like deciding how to move forward, for instance by crossing a river or hiking over the mountain. Translated into modern business context, strategy would hence imply long-term planning, like deciding which new geographic markets to enter, what new products and services to launch, and how to do this, and so on and so forth. Tactics then would entail things like deciding on things like how to choose mode of transportation, planning new raw material purchases based on weekly demand forecasts, launching marketing campaigns, etc. Strategy originates from the company's vision and mission statement. The vision is basically a picture of a better future, a desired state where the company wants to be at some point in the future. The vision should be ambitious enough to create motivation, but not unrealistic to the point that it demotivates people. What's important to note here is that it doesn't have to be achieved, but instead serve as a long-term bearing point for the company. The vision is usually about solving a grand challenge of target customers and the fundamental reason why the company was founded in the first place. The mission statement, on the other hand, is more about how the vision is supposed to be achieved, in the sense that it explains how value is being created and delivered to the target customers. It's also important to remember that a single company does not only have a single strategy, but many of them at different levels. At the top, we find the so-called corporate strategy, which is concerned about the question in which market to compete. This can imply both geography and product service markets. In other words, at the core, corporate strategy is about deciding on which products and services to sell in which markets. At one level below, we find the business strategy. The business strategy is about decisions on how to compete in certain markets, once products, services, and geographies have been decided upon. Put simply, the business strategy can be boiled down to one of the three generic ones, namely, first, cost leadership, second, differentiation strategy, and three, focus or niche strategy. Cost leadership basically means competing by offering low product price, and this obviously necessitates low cost or else the business wouldn't be profitable. And in order to achieve low cost, this usually entails serving a broad market with generic products so as to achieve economies of scale, but also imitating competitors so as to reduce overhead costs and R&D expenses. Examples of companies competing in this space could be companies like, for instance, Walmart, IKEA, Volkswagen, Huawei. Differentiation strategy is in a sense the opposite to cost leadership, as the goal is not to imitate competitors, but instead to differentiate from them. Differentiation leads to uniqueness in the marketplace, leading to the opportunity to charge a premium price, thereby enabling coverage of high R&D expenses that are required in order to compete in this space. Examples of companies here are, for instance, BMW, Apple, and Harrods. Focus or niche strategy finally entails focusing heavily on a small piece of the overall market, in other words, a niche, and serve those customers exceptionally well. By doing so, customers are willing to pay a high premium price, which can offset the lack of economies of scale and high R&D expenses. Examples of companies in this domain are, for instance, Ferrari, Rolex, and mobile phone accessory brand Vertu. From the business strategy, so-called functional strategies can then be derived for each of the corporate functions or the enterprise. For instance, the marketing function has a marketing strategy, purchasing has a purchasing strategy, R&D has an R&D strategy, and so on and so forth. It's important that the business strategy supports the corporate strategy and that the functional strategies support the business strategy. It's also important that the functional strategies collectively serve the best interest of the company at large, not just the corporate functions they themselves belong to, so that the competition arises between them. If this can be achieved, we say that there is strategic alignment within the company. Alas, it's an all too common phenomenon where this is not the case, but instead where corporate functions operate in isolation from one another like silos. Hence the commonly used term management silos, so as to describe this phenomenon. How do we avoid this? Well, the most effective way of achieving this is by careful setup of incentives and KPIs, because this is what ultimately will influence people's behavior within the organization. Or as Charlie Munger, the lifelong business partner of Warren Buffett, once said, "Give me your incentives and I'll show you the outcome." In other words, in order for strategic alignment to be achieved in an autonomous fashion, there need to be shared objectives across the organization. This means that every function should have a KPI, certain part of the KPI set, say 20%, allocated to so-called shared KPIs, which are derived from other functions. Take purchasing, for instance, which traditionally have had three broad categories of KPIs, namely cost, quality, and delivery. If you let these comprise 80% of the total KPI weighting, the remaining 20% should comprise KPIs related to other functions, like for instance marketing, production, and R&D. In this way, it becomes natural for purchasing people to proactively collaborate with the aforementioned functions, so as to benefit these and by doing so simultaneously benefiting oneself. Strategic alignment is perfected when selfish behavior is calibrated and steered in a way that benefits overall company performance. So how do we formulate and implement a strategy? To begin with, we need to determine the so-called strategic gap. Basically what that means is that we need to know where we are and where we want to be in the future. To use an analogy, see it a little bit like a boat on the sea that sets sail in order to reach a certain destination. In order to navigate properly, you need to know both the destination and the point of departure. And in order to reach the destination without capsizing, we also need to know the surrounding waters so that we can navigate around treacherous reefs and other dangers. In order to see where we are today, we conduct a so-called internal assessment, which basically means identifying the strengths and weaknesses of one's own company. This assessment can basically be done by identifying what kind of resources that are available, for instance, in terms of people, equipment, and infrastructure. The external assessment, on the other hand, is about identifying opportunities and threats in the surrounding environment. Examples of these could be anything from new competitors entering the market and new technologies being developed to things like natural disasters or labor strikes. Collectively, the internal and external assessments form the basis of the so-called SWOT analysis, which can be tracked back to Professor Albert Humphrey at Stanford University in the 1960s. Once we have concluded the internal and external assessments, we can move on and determine the strategic gap. We do this by looking at the goals and objectives from the past and use these as a basis for setting new ones. It's the distance between those two sets which constitutes the strategic gap. Once we have set new goals and objectives, we can then start formulating a strategic action plan which tells us what to do by when in order to reach our strategic destination. In reality, the action plan is nothing but a project plan telling us what needs to be done, by who and by when, and what resources and headcount are needed to do so. While the strategy is being implemented, we also need to continuously monitor performance in order to ensure that we stay on track according to predefined targets. In case of deviation between actual and expected performance, there are two options available, namely, first, take corrective action, or two, adjust targets. Most people believe that adjusting targets is considered cheating. However, over longer time periods, the environment has a tendency to change so that the targets are no longer relevant. In such circumstances, target adjustment can be warranted. It's important to keep in mind, though, that target adjustment must never be applied as a quick fix or shortcut. And whatever changes are being made must be approved by relevant authority and communicated to all stakeholders affected by such a decision. In sum, if we follow the aforementioned procedure, the chance of success will be high, with a much higher success rate compared to navigating the strategic landscape randomly. In forthcoming videos, we will explore topics like internal and external assessment, target setting, and performance management more in depth. Until then, please hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel for alerts about upcoming videos, and kindly provide your valuable feedback in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, take care, and see you next time. Until then, bye bye.